Okay, let's get started. Welcome back. This is the fourth episode of Think Travel Payments, the webinar series. My name is Paul van Alphen, and I'm happy to welcome two industry friends of mine today. Let me start with the longest of the two. Josep, welcome. How are you?
Pretty well,
Quick,
Paul, and thank you for the invitation.
yeah, maybe a very quick intro. I know it's difficult with your long career, but maybe a quick introduction from your side.
Well, for the talk that we are talking today, mainly I've been talking extensively for online travel agencies. I just started with eDreams Odigeo, and then I've been helping a lot of OTAs on payments and reconciliation.
Okay, thank you very much. So you're my OTA expert today, and Aziz, welcome. We recently got to know each other, and really a big fan of your work at MNC. So maybe a quick introduction from your side as well.
Well, hi, Paul, and hi, Josep. So nice to meet you again in this panel. So mainly today we'll be talking about reconciliation, the challenges, and what reconciliation, as a very old process, is doing here in this new revolutionary payment track. And I hope that we will be able to answer all of the questions. And thank you for the invitation, Paul. Thank you very much.
And maybe a quick word on MNC. You're based out of Tunisia, and company specialized in reconciliation for airlines, right?
Yeah, so we're based in Tunisia and in France. We have a good background in financial processes for the travel business. We have our product Adat for reconciliation mainly, but we do a lot of work on the revenue accounting side, on the payment side, and we have great partners. And that's how we try to bring our expertise today to open up for the wide audience of Paul. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So before we get started, always a round of housekeeping. This is Zoom, and there's a Q&A box, and hopefully at the end of the session we have some time left for some questions from the audience. This session will be recorded. It will become available on YouTube, typically a couple of days after the session, so hopefully early next week. And we also have a dedicated page on LinkedIn called Think Travel Payments, where also content is shared from the sessions and also the planning for the upcoming episodes of this series. With that, going back to the list of items that we're covering during this first season of Think Travel Payments. So we touched on introduction to airline travel payments, the framework, the basics. We did deep dive with Sandra Mianda from Paperworks and Martin Royers into cards and alternative forms of payment. And we also had a session on value-added services. And today we'll talk about what happens, let's say, from the mid office to back office in that area, and to make sure that the end-to-end process runs smoothly. And we have, for after the summer break, we have also sessions lined up on indirect sales channels, more deeper dive on OTAs, and maybe Josep, you'll be back then, but also fraud risk management and B2B payments, so lots more to cover. But it's also depending on what comes up in the industry, what are the hot topics, and what's in demand for being discussed during this series of webinars. So for today, back office reporting reconciliation. In my own practice as consultant, I've noticed that there's a lot of focus on fixing the front end, the checkout, the forms of payment, the routing, etc. But it's all also very much depending on what happens after that, right? To make sure that the process works end to end, also with the colleagues in the mid office and the back office. So today we'll touch on the settlement step, we'll briefly touch on refunding, on reporting and BI, and we'll definitely do a deep dive into the reconciliation, both by Josep and by Aziz from an OTA perspective, but also from an airline perspective. Start off with that. We'll also cover invoicing, not so much all the cost elements, but what kind of forms of invoicing are around, and we'll wrap it up with some industry news from a very busy event season that we're having at the moment, and I'll touch on some of the topics there. This series of webinars is also made possible by Finmont, and Finmont is a payment orchestration provider focusing on the travel industry, both on the the pay-in and pay-out side, but also on airlines and other providers, other sellers in this space, like OTAs, but also other forms of payment. So, like I said, if we touched on orchestration before, that's typically starts with, on the left-hand side, the multiple channels. And I know that for an airline, that's slightly different, or a lot different than for an online travel agency, for instance, but we'll get that later. The orchestration component, the engine in the middle, and then at the other side of that, all the providers that play a role in there, the acquirers, the payment service providers, the individual forms of payment, but also the value-added service. But in the end, to reconcile from order to cash, as it's called, also need to make sure that the transactions flow end to end, that the money that comes in is reconciled against the transactions, the debits, the credits, and that it all makes sense and it all can be posted to the financial systems and can be reported to the shareholders as well as being received. So where, as my good friend Laurie Geblaas always says, where is the money? That's a very important topic for today. Make sure that whatever is sold is also reported and also reconciled against the funds received. With that, Josep, I'd like to bring you to the stage, well, the virtual stage this time. We recently had a very interesting event together where we shared the stage actually, so not this time. If we look at it from one of the main players in the travel space, obviously are the flight OTAs, hotel OTAs, but for this particular session, we'll stick to the flight OTAs selling flights. Reconciliation actually has multiple dimensions. It's not only the pay-in, but also the payout and making sense of all of this. But I'd like to give the floor to you, Josep, and from your extensive experience and background, can you elaborate on a relatively high level, because there's a lot of detail, I know that, what does the process look like and what are the key components that play a role?
So,
Josep, go ahead.
From an OTA back office perspective, it's in somehow pretty similar to a back office of any other provider. So if you look at tour operator, or if you look an airline, or if you look a train company, a car rental company, or whatever, more or less the OTA back office, it's similar. You have the operation that arrives, you have the payment method that arrives from the customer. Then you need to make sure that you are getting authorization coming from the different payment providers. Then you've got the reconciliation files in the bank, and then finally you are making sure that the funds are there. What makes extraordinary different an OTA back office from the rest of the players, more or less, is the little green box that says agent's own card. Okay, and literally is where most of the complexity of the back office comes. So usually the OTAs are not using one single credit card provider, they are using multiple credit card providers. And as you were showing previously that you were having an orchestration system in order to make sure that you are routing to the appropriate acquire the transaction. In the case of an OTA, is critical to have an orchestrator to allow to which payment method are you going to use to pay the provider. Because basically you can use either the payment provider coming from the customer, or you are able to use a payment provider specific for that customer, or from the constellation of the different systems. So it's extraordinarily critical there, which is the credit card that you are going to use. And the credit card can depend on the same rules that you are having on an orchestration system. No? The other important thing for an OTA is that this back office and payment reconciliations needs to work extraordinary precisely. An OTA is a master of moving cash between different payment methods. So you need to have your back office perfectly tuned so that you know how much money it's coming in, how much money it's coming out, and which is the kind of reporting, alert systems, and issues that you are having there. If you are a provider, if you are an airline, if you are a rental car, if you are a train company, probably the customer is going to provide you with another payment method and it's going to finish with that one. In the case of an OTA, it's much more complicated. So you have one payment method given by the provider, and then you need to be extremely quick in order to give that to the customer. And so this means that you need to have alert systems to tell you what's happening, what's wrong, whatever. So you cannot do it offline. You cannot manage most of the systems offline. It needs to be quick, fast, intelligent, and probably it's extremely complicated that a human touches. So you need to rely a lot on rule systems and automatic systems.
Yeah. And Josep, I think because in most cases the pay in by the end customer and to the payout to the supplier is decoupled. It can also be a different amount. It can be a different form of payment, obviously. Those are decoupled, but also different currencies. So what's the role of managing all these currencies for someone running this very sophisticated operation?
This one is one of the complexities. You need to make sure that FX exchange it's properly set up, that you are able to manage the risk that you are taking in each one of the transactions. And you need to take a lot of care managing that risk. If not, probably you can have complicated surprises at some point. So most of the business of an OTA is based on complexity. It's try to make as simple as possible to your customer and manage the full complexity of all the issues on the back, so that basically the customer doesn't know how problematic it is to purchase with a certain provider, or which is the payment method, or a lot of tricky things that happens there. That's precisely the work of an OTA, make the life of the customer simple.
And Josep, I think you make it more complicated, more sophisticated by, for instance, doing like virtual interlining, where you even have like multiple suppliers in the background that have their own requirements and then all bring it together, right?
But this is the work of an OTA. Which is the value that brings an OTA to the customer? If you are selling just a simple ticket that you can purchase to a website, at the end, the customer is not seeing any kind of value. The customer sees a value on purchasing with on an OTA if the OTA is doing all the complicated work behind. So if I need to purchase with 3 different providers in order to get the lowest price possible, I will do it. I will take that complexity. The customer doesn't need to know exactly what I am doing. At the end, I need to make sure that the customer will receive the product that he wants for the price that he's accepting to pay.
And as you already said, you're then, as an OTA, absorbing basically all that complexity, but also have to deal with the impact of that on your back office system, right? And the payouts and the money flows and the reconciliation. There's a lot of hard work being done there.
There is an extraordinary work, because at the end, reconciliation, it's just one single step. You need to make sure that your call center receives the transactions and knows exactly at which stage the transaction it is. It means that the call center needs to be able to do the refunds in an automatic way. So accepting a payment method, it's easy. Usually the problem is all the cycle that you need to manage when you are accepting that payment method. And when you are doing the same, when you are paying the provider, you are in the middle of two important loops that you need to make sure that all the information is available there, that the money that you are taking in, you are using to fund out, and the money arrives at the right time to each one of the providers. It's critical. If not, you can get into a lot of problems if you are not able to manage all the cash flow that there is into the middle.
And is there, I think there's a main difference between, let's say, selling tickets, airline tickets, and hotel booking because of the timelines. Is it quick? And therefore the credit, the time you get to receive the pay in and then later on do the payout, there's a bit more room to maneuver there. Is that correct?
Basically, the same complexity that you can find in an airline, you can find it in the hotel industry. The little difference between the hotel industry and the airline industry is the mix of the complexity. Basically, in the airline industry, most of the tickets are purchased at the moment, so you need to pay them at the moment. In the case of hotel industry, there is a much more space for other type of managing cash. So depending on which kind of provider you are talking, the issues that you are having on managing paying and payout are different. But because airlines are mainly at the present stage, I want the money immediately. While other providers, you can do little different things, and it's not so much I want the money now that it's in the airline industry.
But it comes also with other complexities, as you already mentioned. Okay, thank you very much, Josep. Let's move on. The next topic that I have selected is the multi-currency settlement side. And maybe some background, and on the right-hand side, you see an example of how actually by airlines, how they treat the currency from a base currency through all kinds of steps, through systems, and how it's presented to the customer, how it's paid, and how it's funded. So there are multiple steps in there. And it could be as simple as a euro transaction, but it could also be multiple steps from a dollar to a euro to a Thai baht, and then also for instance, the currency conversion plays an important role in that, and also the timeline plays an important role in that. But maybe going back to the basics, as a merchant, an airline, an OTA or others, you're typically funded by your credit card acquirer or third-party scheme like an American Express, or it's consolidated by a payment service provider, PSP. Or in some cases, if you work directly with a gateway, you might receive funds directly from an individual payment product, if it's a PayPal or an open banking solution, etc. That means that there are multiple flows of funds coming into your accounts. There are some differences there, typically if it's domestic or cross-border, that has to do also with, for instance, with currency conversion, but also with timelines, and also the cost involved in that. Typically, if you work with in a large country, in the domestic acquirer, for instance, well, they will always fund in the local currency. If you work domestically in Thailand with a Thai acquirer, you would receive Thai baht. If you would work with a cross-border acquirer, you would not receive Thai baht because that's not one of the scheme settlement currencies. They're typically 14 up to 17, supported by Visa and MasterCard. There's quite a difference between like-for-like settlement and non-like-for-like settlement, but it also depends very much on the capabilities on the merchant side, in their back office, in their treasury team. How capable and willing are they to deal with multiple currencies, or will they then agree with their provider, for instance, to settle everything to, for instance, one currency, US dollars, for instance, the most common one, but in Europe could also be euros. Obviously, for non-like-for-like, it's very important to keep a close eye on what is the conversion methodology, how is it reported, what's the source for the currency conversion? Is it the scheme rate, or let's say European bank rate, or another rate, a Reuters rate, and also what's the methodology around the markup that the provider, if it's an acquirer or a scheme or a payment product, actually uses to convert the original amount to the to be settled amount. And also, what's the timeline in that? What's the so-called T plus, the time between submitting the settlement and actually receiving the funds in your account? And that could be 1 day, but could also easily be like 6 or 7 days, depending on the currency conversion and the methodology being used. Sometimes also part of the pricing, you can receive the funds a bit later, but get a reduction in your cost. APMs, depends, like I said already, it depends quite a bit if it's part of a collecting payment service provider, so like a full stack provider that bundles all the funds and the reporting and does the conversion for you and then hands over the funds, or if you work with a payment gateway or a payment orchestration provider that technically routes the transaction to the provider, but then the funds is settled directly to you as a merchant from that payment, from that product provider into your either local account or central account. Another factor that plays a role is also if there's in case of, for instance, card transactions, a holdback or a deposit. Is it the rolling reserve? Is it the cash reserve? And do you receive the full amount right quickly after the transaction, or is it, for instance, held for an X period of time, or is a holdback being built up? All of this, and we'll come to that later as well, but Aziz as well, is also part of the end-to-end reconciliation, because how the funds is how and when the funds is remitted, in what currency and what time, and for instance, if there are chargebacks in there or not, or if there's a holdback being held, that's all part of the end-to-end reconciliation. Make sure that the funds received in the account is actually matching with the transactions that have been processed by the merchant with their providers.
Just one comment, Paul.
Yes, please.
In the previous slide, also it's important to take into account sometimes when you are playing with the multi-currency funds settlement, is that sometimes also different legal entities are also involved there. So and then gets a bit much more complicated because you need to get the appropriate tax structure, the appropriate way of managing how different entities are working together in order to fulfill the customer. So it's not strange that if you have a legal entity in UK that receives everything in pounds, you have another entity in euros, and then there are some kind of mix when both together needs to work in order to do the process of fulfilling a customer.
Yeah, you're right. And I think that the treasury team is typically involved in that to make sure that it flows smoothly, correctly, but and also in a compliant manner between the different areas of the company. Thank you, Josep, for that. One of the other, I would say, back office operations after receiving the funds, it sometimes also needs to be given back. So if you agree on providing a refund, because it's a merchant initiated credit, basically, and that's what you see on the right hand side is a diagram from the airline payments handbook by Thomas Heldorf. Basically, it will follow the flow back. So where in a typical payment, a debit situation, the cardholder money would move from their account to, in the end, the airline account through the scheme and the acquirer. In the case of a refund, it basically, the journey goes back, and it means that the airline will then initiate a credit transaction, send it to a payment service provider or an orchestration provider to the acquirer, who will then route the money back through the issuer to the cardholder. And I think what we've seen, especially during the pandemic, that automation and maybe focus on this process, there was some room for improvement. Some things actually broke, but it's quite a complicated task, and it's also from a compliance and risk perspective very important to make sure that these processes are really well organized, because in the end, you're printing money to a certain extent, and if, for instance, the scheme rules mandate stipulate that you can only refund the original cardholder for a transaction, otherwise you would be disbursing funds, and that's not the idea. But there are, for instance, and you see it on the left-hand side, also use cases where that non-reference refunds, where you actually cannot refund back, or there is no original transaction. It's, for instance, a payout. There are special rules around that. But typically, as a merchant you're dealing with, and as a payment provider, you're dealing with full refunds, with partial refunds, and sometimes also with multiple refunds, where, for instance, a transaction is refunded in several steps, and the systems and the processes and the policies need to be able to deal with that. And maybe, Josep, you can, because I think airlines still have an exemption to that, but have you seen OTAs using refund authorizations where the cardholder in their app can already see that, for instance, a refund was processed and that the money will then follow a couple of days later? Have you come across that?
Yes, it works. And it removes. One of the problems with the credit card is that you order a refund and then it's not in your hands. It's in the hands usually of the bank. So it's extremely useful to tell to the customer, I have ordered a refund, the refund is coming, and now depends only on your bank entity, no? And this generates a lot of nice surprises coming from the customers. So it's a way of telling to the customer, okay, you have received a complaint from you, we understand it, we have reacted immediately, and we are giving a solution. On the back, the problem is then that you are not able to control the cycle of the banks returning the money to them. But at least you are telling them, I've done my part of the job. And it works extremely nice to reduce the pressure over the call centers.
Yeah, no, it's always been a customer contact pain point in the past, and having to provide an ARN and acquire a reference number to the customer to go back to the bank. Look, it was actually processed. That was always a painful step. And I think it also, and you already touched on that, Josep, the timeline. I see some providers in the market, we can speed up the time that a customer receives the refund, but typically it's more the internal process and the willingness to speed up the money flow that drives the timeline. It's not so much the technical process that drives that. So just a bit about refunding. Again, I think there's room for improvement to further automate that, and I think we've now seen that there can be instances where a mass number of refunds need to be processed in a swift way. And by the way, Josep, I think also the regulators, if it's the European one, it's also the DOT in the US, are on top of this and basically mandating that I think it's 7 days or 10 days that no further delays or no 30 days or 40 days timelines are accepted anymore. It needs to be turned around quite quickly to make those regulations work.
Yeah. Usually the problem, Paul, is that when you are an OTA, you are in the middle of nothing. So, and especially when the funds should come from the provider or whatever. So most of the times you are trying to do as much as possible. But for me, the only thing that works is tell to the customer, I've done my job. And because...
And where you are the merchant of record in the merchant model, I think also during the pandemic, the OTAs were quite, they turned around those requests as fast as they could, but then they would have to wait on the supplier at the back end to then refund them, right?
Yeah. Well, at the end, usually the money that takes an OTA, it's for paying the provider. So it's not that you are holding the money in most of the cases. So you are taking the money, you are taking your commission, and you are paying the provider. So it's for you managing the cash. It's extremely important, and also it's critical to make sure that the customer is aware of what you are doing.
Yeah. Okay, before we move to Aziz and look into the airline reconciliation, and I know, Josep, this is also close to your heart, and maybe we can just make a quick stop here. You mentioned already in your introduction that managing the end-to-end process, for instance, also determining how to route transactions, but also keeping a very close eye on success rates and conversion. That is at the heart of an OTA's operation, right?
Everything is on the heart of OTA's operations. So basically, it's a world that no one is touching anything. It's completely automated. So you need to create your rule systems, and you need to make sure that the system is working. So the only way of managing that complexity, it's because you are having reporting and BI tools in place that are telling you everything, that are telling you when the money is going to arrive, that it's telling you something, it's happening strange onto the system. It's telling you that certain types of cards are being stopped, that probably a point of sale or a PSP is not working properly, and so on. Sometimes we sit down with the providers and we tell, okay, your system is giving us this level of errors. And most of the time they are telling, it's the first time that we are seeing it, because we don't have such a complex system to understand how my system is working. For an OTA, this is your blood and your life. You need to make sure that everything is completely automated, that it's extremely precise, and that it's accurate and working almost immediately. And you cannot do it without reporting and BI tools at any point.
Yeah, and 24/7, right?
24/7, yes, even up to the second.
Okay, yeah, and many aspects play a role, and probably don't have time to go into too much detail, maybe for another session. But I remember having a discussion with you how to organize fallbacks in case of potential fraud, to switch to a payment method that cannot be reversed, just to rescue the transaction, right? So we had all kind of mechanisms in place to smoothen and to optimize the process as much as possible.
Yeah. So basically,
okay. Go ahead.
No, but basically you need to make sure, for example, that the credit card is working, that the payment methods are working, that the provider is working. And if the provider is not having acceptable rates, you need to move to a different provider. But all of this needs to be switched and automatically changed in an automatic way. You cannot rely on people to check what's happening. You have a customer and you need to serve. So first, change the provider, get an alert, find someone to fix it, but then continue selling.
Okay. Okay, Aziz. Like I said in my introduction, I think what I've seen over the last probably 5-6 years is that a lot of focus has gone, rightfully so, into orchestration, streamlining the front-end process, the routing, like we saw in the introduction slide. But we also seen that you can only do so much as if your back office is able and willing to absorb, right, to deal with. And this is your core business. So maybe you can use my diagram here on a very high level to explain how an airline approaches reconciliation, or should approach reconciliation, and what are the main factors in there? What are the different steps in there?
Okay, so thank you, Paul. First of all, I think it's yeah. I mean, I can use your graph because it says a lot, and it says it all for reconciliation. It has a lot of it has all of what I think needs to be said for an introduction to reconciliation. Well, first of all, because the audience is, I mean, I think it's like we have a wide audience between IT people looking for payment people, back office people, and front end people. I would give a quick glance on what reconciliation is. So I looked it up because I had to. So reconciliation is mainly when you have two people becoming friendly again after an argument. Well, that's the literature. Or what does it say? Another description is reconciliation is about strengthening relationships. So people arguing, or groups of people arguing, and you bring them together. Business-wise, reconciliation is about ensuring that what you have sold, as you said in the beginning, is exactly what you have been remitted in the bank. So as the your slide says it, so it's from the order, because we are not talking about tickets anymore for the airlines, but a full order, and which complements what Josep was saying earlier about the pay-in and payouts, to cash. So how to ensure that what you have sold, whatever you have sold, ends up in your bank account with the right amounts. And that's mainly reconciling through different steps and different parties the amounts and the cash flow that is happening between two parties. So we have two flows. We have mainly, and you mentioned this at a glance in one of your slides, you have the informational flow, making sure that everything is reported as it should be through the sales and the billing and the settlement and the bank, as you thoroughly have shown in the slides that you have put. And also the financial flow, which is the more critical one, because that's where the money is actually. So making sure that the gross amount in the sale ends up as the net expected amount in your bank deposits throughout those parties and throughout the complex world of payment today. So it's mainly about reconciling different sources, strengthening the data, making sure that your transaction as a sale from your sales report is complemented from the data from all of those parties, informationally wise, and are correctly reconciled together with nothing else. Now, why reconciliation? I mean, is it a mandatory step for airlines, and why we do it? And this is also part of what we see in the slide. In the past, reconciliation is a very old process. I mean, I expect that even at a personal level, when you sell something or buy something, you check your bank accounts. You make sure that whenever you're buying a coffee or a car or a house, you make sure that you have been debited or credited, depending on what you're selling or purchasing, the right amount. And what we've seen during our, I would say, journey through reconciliation is that it's an anecdote actually, but reconciliation lost its soul. I mean, the initial purpose of reconciliation is, I would say, two. The first thing is financial control. You control for yourself as a merchant that your financial transactions are happening correctly. When you sell something, you expect an amount to be remitted in your bank. And also from a regulation perspective, because of money laundering and so on, some part of reconciliation or the main part of reconciliation is mandatory as per the regulations. Now, that's the old way of doing things, but why we bring reconciliation today? And as you said, Paul, how painful is it for the people who are turning to payment orchestration platforms and to the front end new processes? It is painful for them to come up with a back office process that is resilient. And reconciliation today has new challenges beyond financial control, beyond regulations. There are new challenges, and I see them in the slide actually. I think that the first one is when we see the boxes under the sales, we see that we don't only have PSS today. We don't only have direct and indirect sales. And we have Josep with us today. And we see that today airlines, with the move to order, they are moving to more and new distribution channels. So with offer and order as a transition and to open up to new markets. And especially with COVID, we've seen that airlines sensed more the need to open up to new markets, to sell more than airline tickets. And the way to open to those distribution channels is not only a front-end thing, you have to back it up because you have to control at the end. And if you don't have a resilient reconciliation process that is flexible enough, then you will not be able to follow. And this is, I think, why we've seen today more and more requirements for a payment orchestration platform and a reconciliation tool in one single RFP, for example. We've seen it widely in the recent years, and we can understand why, because the front end should be backed up by a backend process. The second, I would say, challenge that I see and is the revolution in the payment world. I mean, why today in the payment webinars of Paul, we are talking about reconciliation, which is more of a, the back office accounting process. It's mainly because with the emergence of new form of payments, you don't only have cash and credit cards with the traditional ways of settlements, You have APMs, you have the new ways to settle and to sell and to actually get paid for. You have the Google Pay, the Apple Pay stuff, which from a settlement perspective, they have quite a different way to settle, and hence a need for a reconciliation that is adaptable to those kind of processes. You have more also internal form of payments, such as all of those fidelity programs and loyalty programs that also are kind of form of payments that need to be controlled. We have more parties, so it's true that it always comes back to sales versus billing versus settlement versus bank, but we see that today we have payment orchestrations, we have new schemes arising, new alternative payment methods arising, and even in the airline world, they are looking to reshape again the way settlement happens between airlines through the BSP initially and traditionally, but maybe new form of payments will arise, and we see them with the new IATA programs, that's the IATA Pay and so on. And this brings complexity to the airlines. The fifth challenge, I have 6 of them, just to give count. So the fifth challenge is mainly that, and I think that it was said in part of the discussion earlier, that we don't only, it's about reconciling more things. It's not only about the net amount that you remitted in the bank. You have MCP and DCC providers. So you have to reconcile what you expect, such as a rate to be applied and the markups to what is correctly applied. And that's one reconciliation. So that's a reconciliation that is not flat or linear. It is with other parties that are providing other stuff. You have the fees that you have to reconcile. You have your cost of cash because there is this delay in payment, as Paul said in the previous slide, with the T plus and the delay of cash flows. All of those things. So reconciliation is becoming a big thing where you have to integrate with various sources, and you have to reconcile not only your gross amount and your net amount and your commissions, but the commissions are becoming different, various, and you have a lot of ways to account them and to control them. And that is one key challenge that should be resolved by the new reconciliation tools. And last but not least, which we see it in the bottom box, the green one, where we see dispute management, sales auditing, and so on. Because reconciliation is about creating a big graph of data from all those different sources and reconciling between those sources. You have a great opportunity to link the data together, and this would provide a good ground to support your refund processes. As Josep said, it's one painful thing to actually perform the refunds. You don't have any control on the form of payment you'll be refunding on, because I mean you authorized in the payment, but when you're refunding, it's not that easy to make sure that the credit card is eligible again or not, or so on. There is also the chargeback that is highly needed in reconciliation. So it's not a reconciliation thing, but it's a process that is linked and tied to all of the parties that are interacting with the reconciliation tool. The payouts, highly needed by OTAs, but also by the airlines in the over and order part, because if in the world of today, reconciling, as I say, it's also about people being together. So more partnerships are being built between airlines and hotels, airlines and OTAs, airlines and other partnerships. So being able to reconcile the pay-ins, but also the payouts, being able to generate a draft invoice and making sure that you are paying as expected, being paid as expected. So it's not only an inbound process that should be reconciled, but also an outbound process. And that is one important aspect as well as the challenges. So
yeah, I think especially looking towards the future, Aziz, where the airlines are moving or transitioning into offer order and becoming modern airline retailers. That's definitely an area to. And there was one point I wanted to add to that, Aziz. Thank you very much, by the way. I think where airlines are known for thin margins, they're also known for quite a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5% of unallocated sales, right? Where they cannot find what happened to it later. So I think this is key to also keeping the finances under control.
Exactly. And it's a good thing that you bring up the margins, because reconciliation usually was, and up to now is, more of a control thing on your margins. But when it comes up to auditing the costs and what you're paying for, and it's quite a blur area for airlines today and for all of the other merchants, because it's highly volume and they are still paying with the regular reconciliation. So it becomes a leverage for actually optimizing and even becoming an enabler to front-end processes. We see a good opportunity for partnership with payment orchestration platforms and payment providers to know what you're paying for. And maybe you're paying more than you should, and maybe you could optimize things. Maybe you can increase your actually credit card conversions or your conversion rates simply by having a resilient back office process that can predict, thanks to the data that is reconciling in the backend, what opportunities you may have missed and enable you to open up to new markets. So yeah, it's about controlling your margins, but maybe, and also about increasing them, which is unusual for back office processes to do that, actually.
Exactly, and I think it puts a spotlight on it, and that's good, because I think from here you can really do a lot of good stuff. Okay, thank you very much again, Aziz. Let's keep an eye on the clock. We're again. Yes, Josep?
There is also another tricky issue that it's on the reconciliation arena, that it's sometimes you have an agreement with an acquirer saying, if I will give you a percentage of the amount of the DCC transaction on the dynamic currency conversion, no? Suddenly, it appears then a lot of issues into the middle. So how you are accounting that revenue. Also sometimes the credit card of the acceptance of the payment method, it's also taken by the issuer. So when you are making the numbers, are not easy to do it. You need to have a good tool to make a proper reconciliation that takes into account all the different factors, because as you know, depending on the credit card, the fare is completely different. So you need to make sure that you have everything on place in order to make sure that you are accounting properly the revenues. If not, you can get a nasty surprise when you are changing from a DCC provider from one to another.
Exactly. And you're stating, Joseph, when you're saying accounting, that's I think the heart of and the most difficult part, where you need really a good reconciliation, as you said, that is able to follow up and to track the transactions at a very granular level in a very flexible manner, to make sure that you can support that kind of flexibility and reflect that to your accounting. And accounting is not only about posting to ledgers, but it's a good way to control what's happening. So exactly, yeah. For MCP, it's a good example. And from what Paul showed in the previous slide, you can come up with an initial transaction in euro. The DCC providers change it to MCP. Then in the settlement, it comes back to euro. So you only see euro to euro if you're reconciling from sale to bank. And you have a discrepancy, you don't know, you have no clue why it's there. But if you have a granular end-to-end reconciliation from billing to settlement to bank, you can see that there's a double rate that was applied from MCP from euro to GBP, and then from GBP to euro. And you can understand, have a clue what's happening. And you can even leverage on the markup of the MCP, and that's what happens for some airlines. They split the markups.
And I think Aziz, it's in this particular diagram, and there's here an arrow saying the transaction lifecycle, and that's exactly what you just explained, to make sure that every step from all the way from the order creation till the money being funded and even being refunded or reversed, it's completely clear, so that there's no room for confusion in that end-to-end process. Okay, let's move on to a bit of invoicing. So And we're talking about an acquirer or a payment service provider or a product invoicing, an OTA or an airline in this particular case. And on the right-hand side, from one of my diagrams, obviously there are a lot of different costs that attracted by accepting payments as an airline or as an OTA. Some of them are fixed, some of them are monthly, some of them are variable, some of them are based on the amount or on the type of card, for instance, being used, like the interchange. So it's very difficult to get a grasp. I mean, historically or way back in the past, it was relatively simple with blended rates. So you could relatively easily reconcile and also forecast what your cost would be with the unbundling basically of most of the credit card costs also in Europe due to European regulations. It's nice to have full transparency on your costs, but it's also very difficult to reconcile and also very difficult to forecast what your total sum of doing total cost of doing business is, because it's a very complicated mix of different factors from different providers, from different breakdown of the different types of costs. So that, and how is that invoiced typically? Well, it could be initially a net settlement where the variable costs are already deducted before the amount is funded to your account. It also means that you have to make sense of that, already do a proper assessment of what do I expect, and is the amount that I've received in line with what I have calculated up front, and that's not easy either. It could also be a combination where, for instance, the fixed costs or the transaction costs are actually invoiced separately, but the interchange cost and the interchange plus the interchange and acquire costs are net settled. There are also options where, for instance, if you work with a full stack provider collecting PSP, that the total amount is invoiced in arrears and that you receive the original amount, gross amount in your bank account, but then you get an invoice later, and then you have to reconcile your invoice completely. We already touched on currency conversion. It's not only in DC MCP, but also through the remittance. It's typically not invoiced because it's part of the reporting that breaks down what you have received in your bank account. But how is that done? How often is it done? What are the source rates that are being used? What's the methodology? The timings, the refresh. Well, there's a lot of detail there. It could also mean that, for instance, that where you, as an airline, you would actually invoice your acquirer for the amount that you expect for your sales and your refunds. The chargebacks are not following that. It's not. They are not initiated by the airline themselves, so they don't know what's coming. So typically, those are then invoiced separately to make sure that they don't mix up with the reconciliation of the invoices. And like I think was already mentioned, cost reporting. It's a very complicated task. There's a lot of room for confusion there, but there's also a lot of room for optimization there if you understand how that works, and that you can also drive different changes that would optimize it. So a topic by itself, and I think I see that back in partially in the front end orchestration, but definitely also on the reconciliation side, where I think solutions or setup in place, should be able to help out with that. For instance, also, I think I showed in the previous slide as well, for instance, the use, if you have a bilateral agreement between an OTA and an airline, what kind of cards were used, were the costs in line with what you have agreed upon. I think that's also to create some further trust in that relationship. It would be good that also the costs are going full circle, meaning that what you pay for is exactly what you have agreed with your your distribution partners in advance. With that, one final topic before we wrap up. So I typically have a category latest industry news. Well, it's been very busy with events the last couple of weeks, and there's still events going on this week, by the way, and next week as well. Next week I'll be in Amsterdam for Money 2020. Last week I was in London for the Airline and Travel Payments Summit. I had the pleasure of presenting on this topic, introducing Hansin and Jago at Air Europa to discuss their case. And I think what's very important or very interesting here is that this is a new product, basically addressing a gap, historical gap with split payments, making it possible to pay initial transaction in multiple steps, multiple cards, multiple forms of payment with multiple people, for instance, if you have a group payment. But the use case presented here was around, hey, what if if it really, and Mastercard did research in, I think, across 190 airlines over a whole year, that 42% of airline decline transactions actually are due to insufficient funds, where there's not sufficient spending available on the card to cover the whole amount for the booking. Airlines obviously have a typical high average transaction value, so that attracts also a lot of insufficient funds. And what if you could, during the checkout process, already notify the customer saying, okay, wow, this was due to insufficient funds, but by the way, you can also pay with multiple cards to split in the total amount across these multiple cards, and also then leverage the spending you have on different cards as well. And historically, it was never possible. So Air Europa is going to be the pioneer in that and going to launch that solution anytime soon. So I thought it was an interesting news fact to mention. Josep, do you have any experience with split payments, by the way?
Not with some with split payments, but I was working a lot of time on the decline transactions for insufficient funds.
Yeah.
And if you are selling a ticket that has an open date, so that basically you don't need to purchase it today, probably the closing date it's in 1 week or 2 weeks time.
Mm-hmm.
You can take the risk of telling to the customer, here is the PNR, and wait, taking a lot of precautions into the process, but at the end you are able to save probably between 30% and 40% of the decline transactions due to insufficient funds, just by delaying the time of the transaction. So usually, if something has a message of error, doesn't mean that it's an error. Probably you can do a lot of things into the process and save a lot of transactions. An error, it's just a no. It doesn't mean that the credit card is not going through different...
The soft ones, right? The soft declines versus the hard declines, and have a strategy on how to address them and how to rescue them. I think you guys were very much working on that already way back when I worked with you. Okay, looking at the clock, we have a couple of minutes left, sorry. James, do we have any questions? Well, I don't think so. So let's then go to the next session. So after the summer break, and we'll announce. Do we have questions, James?
No questions.
Okay, cool. Okay, and we also running out of time anyway.
There were two questions. One,
okay.
I already answered, and the second one, I was just taking the opportunity to talk about the MCC with Paul and Aziz. So we already covered that.
Okay, cool. So we'll be announcing the date. It will probably be September, so probably again in the 3rd week of September around that time, but we have to still pick a date for episode number 5, but it will be around travel intermediaries, the indirect channel, distribution channel, seen from an airline perspective, especially how do, for instance, payments work with NDC? What are the options available? What are the restrictions? But also, I think, offer, order, settle, deliver. There's a lot of focus on the offer order side for good reasons, but definitely the settle side, but also the deliver side, the servicing side are very important to make the end-to-end process work. And I think we'll definitely touch again then on also, hey, what does it take for an airline to actually become an OTA, and how do you actually pay those suppliers in a timely and very smooth and automated way, and then maybe waiting for an invoice is not the most sophisticated way. So then maybe they will find out as well that there are some tools out there like virtual cards that actually can help with the process. But that's maybe a bit too much detail for today. So I would like to, if you don't have any further comments, Aziz and Josep, I'd like to thank you for joining me today and for your insights. Very good to hear. And then basically thanking the audience for joining again, and hoping to see you for the next episode after the summer. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you, Paul. Bye-bye.